So Joe Biden declared himself president-elect of the United States, and to that end, he also gave an acceptance speech, which leaned very heavily on themes of unity and healing.
It's time to put away the harsh rhetoric, lower the temperature, see each other again, listen to each other again. And to make progress, we have to stop treating our opponents as our enemies. They are not our enemies, they are Americans.
Now, I don't think we're going to see anything approaching healing during Biden's administration. There are too many external forces at play that are working at cross purposes with healing.
How are Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Joe Biden both Democrats? AOC famously said that in any other country, she and Biden, quote, would not be in the same party. Broadly speaking, there are two ideological camps within the party. There's the AOCs and Sanders versus Pelosi's and Biden's.
I don't think people are looking for revolution. I think they're looking for results.
And that's where the progressive movement challenging the establishment comes in.
It's about transforming this country.
Now, keep in mind that the progressives represent only 8% of the voting population in the United States, but they are very vocal, and to some extent they've hijacked the Democrat platform. Biden does not have broad and deep support within the Democrat Party. 44% of those voting for him said that they were voting against Trump as opposed to for Biden. So Biden has a tightrope he has to walk. He has to placate the progressives and incorporate some aspects of their agenda, while at the same time not pushing too far progressive and alienating the moderates who put him in office. So it'll be interesting to see what Biden does to repair the rift between the progressives and the moderates and unify the party, if he can do it.
You cannot come into this White House with the idea that these people aren't the enemy. They are. They have to go into this realizing they're in a war. The war for the soul of America will not end once he's inaugurated, and I hope he remembers that.
This will be difficult for Biden to bridge because the Democrats and Republicans are working off different foundational core values. 77% of Democrats and 80% of Republicans state that they do not share basic values with their counterparts in the other party. One contributor to frustration between the parties is always a divided Congress, and it appears that that's what we're going to have this election. So overcoming the normal tension and animosity that arises from being unable to pursue your agenda is going to be present here. Neither side is going to be able to get anything done legislatively. So you won't be seeing any unity coming out of Congress.
The moment has come for our nation to deal with systemic racism, to deal with the growing economic inequity that exists in our nation.
Now note very carefully what he said here. He equated systemic racism with disparities in outcomes, or inequities. That's the starting point for this entire debate. I don't think the case has been convincingly made that disparity in outcomes is tied directly to systemic racism. For one thing, systemic racism has been illegal in this country for almost 6 decades. Now that's not to say that it doesn't exist, but to the extent it does exist, I think it's beyond a simple legislative fix. I mean, the laws already exist to eradicate it. What we're talking about here is widespread cultural change. But there's a fundamental question here, which is whether or not the government should be attempting to steer the culture as opposed to responding to it. I believe that cultural change takes place on the ground, one location at a time. It evolves. It's not mandated. And any attempt by the U.S. government to force cultural change, I think, is bound to fail and will further divide us into tribes. On one side, you have the pro-equity activists, and on the other side, you have the people who believe that the equity problem has been misdiagnosed as systemic racism. Now, this is a very involved and complex topic, and it's worthy of a much fuller discussion, and we'll try to get that done in a dedicated video in the future. One of the first things I believe that Joe Biden needs to do to heal this country is to denounce the violence that is taking place in the far left fringes of the Democrat Party. And I'm referring, of course, to Antifa, or the anti-fascist movement. Biden denies that they're an organization. He refers to them as an ideology or an idea, and there are other Democrats who are doing the same.
Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you gotta be
not
kidding.
militia. That's what.
But of course, Antifa is an organization. Antifa itself does not deny it's an organization. They have websites, Facebook pages, they sell Antifa merchandise online, and they show up wearing their uniforms for interviews.
CNN's Sarah Ganim now takes us inside Antifa and shows us this group like you've never seen it before.
We are meeting members of the Rose City Antifa, short for anti-fascist. This group's main goal is to disrupt neo-Nazis and white supremacists, but also take on government and capitalism.
Antifa is any group that's willing to stand up against fascists by any means necessary.
By any means necessary, they say, can mean outing a white nationalist at their work or to their neighbors. Or, as we've seen recently, violence, fires, property damage, hand-to-hand combat at protests across the country.
So Antifa is clearly an organization, and denying it is rewarding them for their activities. It's tacitly approving of the violence they perpetrate on innocent citizens and their property.
True. There's violence across the whole country. Do you disavow the violence from Antifa that's happening in Portland right now? There's riots.
That's a myth that's being spread only in Washington, D.C.
And Antifa is not denying it's violent either. They've been very forthcoming about that. So to heal this country, it seems a very easy and important first step to say, let's get the violence out of the streets. Let's quit violating the rights of innocent people.
It's not only that Trump has to lose, but that all his enablers have to lose. We have to collectively, in essence, burn down the Republican Party. We have to level them, because if there are survivors, if there are people who weather this storm, they will do it again.
This president has shown us that he is a misogynist, that he is homophobic, that he is racist. Yet 50% of America saw all of that and looked the other way. I'm not going to say that 50% of Americans are racist and sexist and homophobic, but I will say that that tells me that they will look the other way, and that, I think, is despicable. It is un-American.
So when Trump leaves office in 2021, supposedly the healing and the unification can take place, because it was all Trump's fault anyway. But that's not going to happen. Already we're hearing from high-profile leftists who want to begin compiling lists of Trump supporters. Robert Reich has called for a Reconciliation and Truth Commission. AOC is calling for an archive of names. And the idea here seems to be to target Trump supporters for harassment, punishment, or possibly re-education. So apparently Trump supporters have to be purged of their incorrect thoughts by a group of elites who know better and can bring them around to the correct way of thinking. Robert Reich wrote, "When this nightmare is over, we need a Truth and Reconciliation Committee. It would erase Trump's lies, comfort those who have been harmed by his hatefulness, and name every official, politician, executive, and media mogul whose greed and cowardice enabled this catastrophe." AOC wrote, "Is anyone archiving these Trump sycophants for when they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? I foresee decent possibility of many deleted tweets, writings, photos in the future. Let's remember that tens of millions of people voted for the status quo, even when it meant supporting lies, hate, chaos, and division. We've got a lot of work to do to reach out to these folks in the years ahead and connect with them on what unites us." Well, calling them hateful, lying, chaotic, and divisive is not a good way to reach out. It's amazing to me that these individuals, who are serious people with serious followings, are actually comfortable calling for making lists of political opponents for the purpose of re-education, harassment, or some other sort of punishment. That's just mind-boggling.
Someday soon, the time of Trump will pass. This circus of incompetence, corruption, and cruelty will end. When it does, the men and women in Trump's Republican Party will come to you, telling you they can repair the damage he's done. They'll beg you to forget their votes to exonerate Trump from his crimes, ask you to forgive their silence, their cowardice, and their betrayals as Trump wrecked this nation. Every time they had a choice between America and Trump, they chose Trump. Every time they were called to the service of this nation and their sacred oath, they chose Trump. Every time. Learn their names. Remember their actions. And never, ever trust them again.
McCarthyism used to be a dirty word in this country, but apparently it's not anymore, because now we're calling it truth and reconciliation.
It will deter people who are liars,
Right.
who are enablers, who are really bad people, and they should be deterred.
I hope that this is nothing more than just some hateful spewing on Twitter, but this is really creepy, and who knows how far it could go unopposed. So this is something we really need to keep an eye on.
What President Trump has done in going his spreading of racism, the way he deals with people based on the color of their skin, their national origin, where they're from, is absolutely sickening. No sitting president has ever done this. You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. Poor kids are just as bright and just as talented as white kids. Wealthy kids, black kids, Asian kids.
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
Perhaps Joe Biden's biggest obstacle to unity and healing is Joe Biden himself. He's not a terribly inspiring guy, and as I've mentioned before, he doesn't have broad and deep support within his own party. He has a hard time speaking coherently.
Not a joke. Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
He has made generous use of hateful speech about his opponent.
This is no time for Donald Trump's record of hysterical xenophobia.
He has been credibly accused of sexual assault.
There are growing calls this evening for Joe Biden to address an accusation from a former Senate staffer who says he sexually assaulted her 27 years ago. We get more now from Andrea Mitchell, and a word of caution, some of the details in the story are graphic.
He has been caught several times plagiarizing other speeches.
2020 Democratic frontrunner Joe Biden under fire for allegations of plagiarism in multiple platforms of his campaign. The Biden camp was forced to update its climate platform amid complaints that it lifted lines from outside sources verbatim. Now, the Washington Post says it found instances of plagiarism in his public education platform as well. This isn't Biden's first run-in with these kind of accusations. His 1988 presidential campaign was famously hampered with incidents of plagiarism.
And he has also been accused of inappropriately using his power as vice president to extract personal favors from the Ukraine under threat of withholding American aid.
And I was supposed to announce that there was another $1 billion loan guarantee. And I had gotten a commitment from Poroshenko and from Yatsenyuk that they would take action against the state prosecutor, and they didn't. I said, you're not getting the $1 billion. I'm going to be leaving here. And I think it was, 6 hours? I said, I'm leaving in 6 hours. If the prosecutor's not fired, you're not getting the money. Oh, son of a bitch. Got fired. And they put in place someone who
who was solid.
He's been known to tell a few whoppers.
The president had done his job, from the beginning. All the people would still be alive. All the people, I'm not making this up, just look at the data.
Now, who does that sound like to you? The parallels between Joe Biden and Donald Trump are really remarkable. And we saw how well Donald Trump was able to unify the country. Not at all. So I don't know what makes us think that replacing Trump with Biden is going to make all that much of a difference. So the presence of the COVID virus is making everything in this country that's already keeping us apart that much worse. Now, for one thing, we're all exposed potentially to a deadly virus. Not only that, we're being forcibly locked into our homes. We are unable to make a living. The economy is tanking. And all of this is creating a tremendous amount of distress among the American people. It's spilled over into the streets. There have been numerous protests about COVID policy and subsequent economic policy. On top of all that, we're getting a real bad attitude about government COVID policy, especially when we see governors and mayors and other elected officials ignoring the very rules that they've written for us. They're able to get their hair cut. We can't.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot has been adamant that people stay home and socially distance for weeks. But a social media post from the woman who cut her hair this weekend has some wondering if the mayor is saying one thing and doing another.
They go to the gym. We can't.
I need exercise. I have to stay healthy so I can make the decisions for the people of the city.
They're going to restaurants with 12 of their best friends without masks and without social distancing. We can't.
Tonight, a Fox 11 exclusive. We've obtained this photo of Governor Gavin Newsom dining at the luxurious French Laundry restaurant in Napa the evening of November 6th. It was a birthday dinner party for Newsom's close friend, Jason Kinney, a well-known lobbyist.
It was a very large group of people and shoulder to shoulder, something that he's always telling us not to do. So, yeah, it was a bit annoying, for sure.
I made a bad mistake. Instead of sitting down, I should have stood up and walked back, got in my car, and drove back to my house. The spirit of what I'm preaching all the time was contradicted.
This breeds cynicism and resentment for the government, and that's not a good thing when you're trying to heal and unify a country. The American public doesn't trust the news media. In a recent annual Gallup poll, 20% of Americans trust television news, which puts them in next to last place, right above Congress, which is trusted by 11% of the population. 54% believe the media intentionally misrepresents the facts, and 84% believe the media is at least somewhat responsible for the political rift in this country. And there's good reason for Americans to think that the media bears some responsibility. To understand why, you need to know a little bit about how news companies make money. Simply put, they're in the advertising business. They sell advertising to companies who want to reach their viewers. And the advertising that they want to buy is opposite content that viewers engage with. Okay, and by engagement, I mean shares, likes, and comments. And the content that generates the most engagement is that which elicits fear and outrage. And as long as outrage and fear continue to drive sales for the news companies, we're going to continue to get content that makes us mad and fearful. It's as simple as that. For example, maybe the news company thinks they can make you fearful of a president who has shown some authoritarian tendencies. Maybe it's easy to believe he's a bigot and a Nazi in waiting, a would-be dictator. Maybe he's rude. Maybe he insults other countries. Maybe there's a virus. Well, what the news company will do is make sure they have plenty of that type of content. They will frame it to maximize the amount of outrage and fear you feel, and then they'll pump up the volume by having panels with experts on it talk about how outraged they are and how fearful they are. And so in this way, they're able to milk outrage and fear out of whatever the situation may be. And again, as long as that pays the bills, we're going to continue to get that type of content, and that will continue to polarize us around the issues. The good news is, as consumers of news, we don't have to play along with this. We can dig a little deeper and find good reporters who tell the truth. We can get diverse points of view, sort through the information, and think for ourselves. And in doing this, we may very well create a market for good journalism that we can then reward. This would require, again, individual action. This is not something that Joe Biden can or should even attempt to change. Look, I hate to be so pessimistic in this video, but the fact is we're in a situation of meet the new boss, same as the old boss. There isn't that much difference between Biden and Trump as far as their day-to-day comportment. They're both buffoons, okay? And the consequences of their buffoonery will be visited upon all of us. The fact is the president is not that powerful. There are limits to his or her authority, and as a result of that, they get too much credit for the good stuff and too much blame for the bad stuff. They can't generate cultural change, and a lot of the things we're talking about here today are going to require cultural change. So, I hate to break it to you, but having a new guy in the chair isn't going to make that much of a difference as far as the healing and the unity that we all want in this country. We have a part to play too. What we can do to affect cultural change is to resolve that we ourselves, on an individual basis, are going to be less outraged by the news, less fearful, more diligent in digging for the truth, and more active in communicating our desires and our concerns to our servants in Congress. In this fashion, we'll have better informed representatives and we'll be better informed ourselves. And that's all to the good. I really hope Biden has a wildly successful presidency, because we need that. But I think we have to be realistic about what one man can achieve.